For the longest time, when we thought about conservation, we pictured a perfect, unchanging landscape, basically a postcard with a fence around it. But what happens when the world inside that fence starts to change on its own? Well, that's the massive challenge we're facing right now, trying to protect nature in a world that just refuses to stand still. So that leads to the really big question we're going to dig into. When the fundamental rules of the game are changing, hotter temperatures, shifting rainfall, entire species on the move, how do you even begin to plan for conservation? How do you protect a moving target?
All right, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at why the old playbook is pretty much obsolete. Then, we'll dive into the core ideas for planning in an uncertain world. After that, we'll check out 3 really smart frameworks that put these ideas to work, see the actual workflow that managers use on the ground, and finally, we'll wrap up with what this all means for the future mission of conservation.
So, for decades, conservation was built on this one giant assumption: stability. The whole idea was you could draw a line on a map, call it a park, and the nature inside would, well, just stay that way. But now we know, of course, that climate change doesn't really care about those lines. It's rewriting the rules for everything, both inside and outside the park. And this right here, this lays out that huge shift in thinking perfectly. We're moving away from seeing nature as some fragile photograph that we need to keep under glass. The new way of thinking sees it more like a dynamic, flowing river. The goal isn't to stop the river, but to help the whole system adapt and stay healthy as it inevitably changes. It is a massive pivot in how we approach this work. Okay, so if everything's in flux, how on earth do you plan for anything? I mean, it sounds impossible, right? Well, it turns out you don't need a crystal ball. Modern conservation is really built on 2 foundational concepts that let people make smart decisions, even when they're facing some deep, deep uncertainty. First up is something called scenario planning. And honestly, the best way to think about it is like a strategy game. Instead of betting everything on one single prediction for the future, you explore a bunch of different possibilities. What if it gets warmer and wetter? What if it's warmer and drier? The goal is to find those no-regrets actions, the things that are a good idea no matter which future unfolds. Think about restoring riverside forests. They help reduce flooding, and they boost biodiversity. That's a winning move in almost any scenario. The other key piece of the puzzle is adaptive management. You've probably heard the phrase learning by doing, and that's exactly what this is, but with a system. You try something, you carefully measure the results, and then you use what you learn to make your next decision even smarter. It means every action is treated like a small experiment, which creates this amazing feedback loop that just makes conservation get more and more effective over time. So, okay, we've got these 2 big ideas: plan for different futures and learn as you go. But how do you actually apply them out in the real world? That's where these planning frameworks come in. Don't think of them as rigid rulebooks. They're more like a flexible playbook for turning these concepts into real action. Let's check out 3 of the most popular playbooks. First, you've got the ACT framework. It's a really clear step-by-step process, which is perfect if you're laser-focused on one thing, like protecting a certain species of fish. Then there's CSC, or Climate Smart Conservation. Its killer feature is this built-in loop that forces you to keep asking, hey, are the goals we set years ago still the right ones today? And finally, there's PDA, which stands for Portfolio Decision Analysis. This one's all about the numbers. It literally treats conservation like a financial portfolio, helping you choose the mix of actions that gets you the biggest ecological bang for your buck. Let's just zoom in on the ACT framework for a sec, just to see how this works in practice. It's super logical. You start with a really clear goal. Then you figure out how climate change might mess with it, usually by talking to local experts. From there, you brainstorm a bunch of things you could do, pick the best ones, and put them into action. But here's the crucial part, that last step. You monitor what happens and you adjust your plan. You can see that whole learning by doing idea from adaptive management is baked right into the process. So, whether a manager is using ACT or CSC or something else, the actual day-to-day work tends to follow a really similar path. It's a process that's driven by a handful of really fundamental questions, and each one is answered using this growing toolbox of incredible scientific and analytical tools. And it all kicks off with this one fundamental question. Because, let's be honest, you can't prepare for the future if you have no idea what you're preparing for. The very first step is always to get the best possible picture of how the local climate, we're talking temperature, rainfall, sea level, is expected to change. So how do they figure that out? Well, scientists start with these massive global-scale climate models. But to be useful for a local park manager, they have to zoom way in. They use techniques called downscaling to create really detailed regional forecasts. And to handle all the uncertainty, they never just rely on one model. They combine the results from lots of different models. That's what an ensemble is. And they run them through multiple future emission scenarios, from best case to worst case. Okay, so once you have a decent idea of the kinds of changes coming down the pike, the next obvious question is who or what is most at risk? This is called a vulnerability assessment, and it is absolutely critical for figuring out where to focus your limited time and money. And vulnerability isn't just one thing, right? It's actually a combination of three key ingredients. First is exposure, just how much change is a place actually going to face. Second is sensitivity, how badly does it get hit by that change? A coral reef, for example, is ridiculously sensitive to even the tiniest temperature shift. And third is its adaptive capacity. Basically, how well can that ecosystem bounce back or adjust all on its own? And then there's the big one. One of the things we're already seeing all around us is that species are on the move. They're literally chasing the climate conditions they need to survive. So a huge piece of the planning puzzle is trying to predict where they're headed next. And you know what? Planners have some seriously powerful digital tools to help figure this out. They use computer models that learn the exact climate a species loves, and then they project where that climate is going to be in the future. Then, this incredibly sophisticated software, with cool names like Marksan and Zonation, acts like a master chess player. They take all that data, they factor in costs and other constraints, and they help design the absolute most effective network of protected areas. This is the exact kind of technology that was used to redesign the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. So let's step back. What does all this add up to? Well, it's a fundamental shift in the mission of conservation itself. It's no longer a reactive game of just trying to hold back the tide of change. It's about being proactive, strategic, and completely forward-looking. I think this really gets to the heart of it. The old goal was to preserve that perfect, framed picture of the past. The new goal is to nurture a living, adaptable system. It's about accepting that change is the new normal and focusing all our energy on making smart, intentional decisions that build resilience for whatever the future holds. And this, right here, is really the ultimate takeaway. Conservation isn't just about reacting to problems anymore. By embracing tools like scenario planning and adaptive management, the entire field is transforming. It's becoming a discipline that is proactive, strategic, and designed from the ground up to be resilient in a world that is defined by change. And that leaves us with a final, pretty deep question, Dichuan. If nature is always in motion, and we know the ecosystems of tomorrow are going to look different from the ones we have today, what does our goal of saving nature truly mean in the 21st century?